Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
It was around 2004, 2005, and I was around 14 years old at the time. I had asked my mom to bring me to a friend's house that I had never been to. It was around 8:30 p.m. and it was dark out. I was extremely poor. We didn't own a cell phone or anything of the sort, so we had no directions. We got lost. She wouldn't listen to my directions and 45 minutes passed. It's around 9:15 and she makes a bunch of idiotic turns and get turned around due to massive ongoing construction. They were building a neighborhood in that area. Then we see the strangest road I have ever seen or been on in my life. It was such an attraction for my mom. She enjoyed the horror spooky type stuff, but this was like a magnet to her, but for me I felt very strange. The feeling you get when you have a bad case of déjà vu. This road was long, flat and black with no markings. It was approximately 70% the width of a normal two-lane road. There were no lights on this road. The trees hung over but didn't fully block the sky. There was one street sign, and it's a sign I will never forget because I have yet to see another one. My mother pulls up as close as she can to read it. It was a yellow diamond shape that said, "No persons under 21 allowed on this road." We looked at each other and she goes, "What the fuck?" And she starts cruising down at 15 miles per hour. We get around 40 to 50 meters down the road and there's one more sign. This is the sign we turned around at. Now I don't exactly remember what this one said because my adrenaline was hitting pretty hard at this point, but it was along the lines of, "You will face consequences if you're under 21 on this road." We got out of there and drove home. A couple years after that, I had gone to the area and the road was gone. We drove for hours looking for it.
Native American folklore still carries a lot of weight in American culture, especially with regards to myths and legends of paranormal entities or experiences. I'm not sure if it's because we trust these cultures that have been around for years, or because we have reverence for their beliefs in general, but whatever the reason, we seem to have respect for their tales. The Wendigo and Skinwalkers are almost common knowledge these days. Most people who even have a slight interest in creepy stuff have probably heard various stories regarding these creatures. They're both very scary to consider. I'm interested if anyone here knows of any other, equally scary, creatures that deserve more attention. Maybe even a cryptid reported in your local area that gives you the willies or keeps you from venturing deep into the wilderness. The chupacabra is also pretty notorious in the zeitgeist, but I'm ignorant on if the origin of that one is strictly Native American or not. One interesting creature I've come across is the Wechuge. Its origins lies in the deep parts of northern Canada and Alaska, it seems. A bit further up from the Wendigo's homeland around the Great Lakes and northeast United States. The Wechuge is very similar to the Wendigo, only it seemingly would possess those that craved strength or broke societal norms. On the Wikipedia page, it's very brief. It lists one of these being flash photography. I'd imagine native tribes were weary of Western influence in general, however this one feels eerily specific. I have to wonder about the spiritual ramifications of taking flash photography in the middle of the dark woods of remote northern Canada. Creeps me out. I can imagine the Wechuge would have a field day with anyone who's trying to rough it out in that wilderness. The inclination to fall into your most courageous and self-reliant self is almost a requirement for such inhospitable conditions. That's what makes it all the more unsettling. If this thing did exist, that's exactly where it would lurk. Prey upon the types of characters that would naturally find themselves roughing it out in the woods. You don't just end up out in the middle of the wilderness willy-nilly. It takes a certain kind of person to make that choice, and that's exactly what this thing would want.
My mom told me a story about when she was a very young girl. She grew up on a reservation. For as long as I can remember, she would always take me to funerals and wake with her. The first one I attended was when I was 8 years old. She told me that when she was young, a family member she was close with passed away. There is a superstition that one must always be awake with the body during the wake, to watch the fire and spend one last night with them. A body is never to be left alone during a wake. Because she was younger, my grandparents didn't want children at wakes, so she had to go home. She said that the next day, there was no service, there was no funeral, and nothing was said about it till later on. She never thought to ask. Kids should be seen and not heard, she always said. But her mother told her years later that the relative that had passed away sat up that night. The firekeeper fell asleep and the fire went out. It is extremely important to note that the fire is started on the first day of the lost one's journey, and must stay lit for 4 days until the funeral is over. In the early morning, when the firekeeper woke up, he woke up to screaming. The ladies that came to make breakfast that morning were screaming uncontrollably when they walked in. The corpse was sitting up in the casket. The funeral home that was responsible for the services had to remove the body while the family watched, as it was impossible to lay it back down. The service was not held. The body was taken and buried immediately after. My mom says this is why we sat up with them. The relative that had passed was up alone. So he sat up for himself. I have also asked my grandparents about this, and they have pictures of said relative. They talked about it once, and said not to ask about it again.
Native American ghost stories. I have compiled a bunch of stories. None are told by me specifically. I do have a few of my own, but I will be posting the ones that I like the most. If you have anything to add, please feel free to add. Let's begin with describing my hallway. When you walk into my apartment, to the right you will see my parents' bedroom and to the left you will see my bedroom. This story took place in my bedroom. When you walk into my room, the first thing you will see is my window right in front of you. It's in the middle. Next to it, right side, my bed. So when you peek up from the bed, you face the window. By the way, my bed is against the wall. Anyway, one night I woke up feeling like I had just slept a few minutes. I looked to my window. I have a roller curtain where you drag it down from the top of the window, and I saw a figure with long hair halfway through my window. My window was still closed. It was moving, trying to get in. Suddenly the figure freezes. It must have felt me staring at it. It turns its head slowly towards me. Now, we both looked at each other. Remember that I just woke up, so I'm not fully aware of what's happening. I looked at it for 5 to 10 seconds, when I realized what was going on. It had no features, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a blank spot. I jumped out of my bed, ran out from my room and stood there for a minute, but I needed to know if someone tried to break into my apartment. So I walked slowly into my room. I switched the lights on, but no one was there. That night I slept with the TV on. Either I'm losing my mind or that was sleep paralysis, but I could move, so maybe I saw something real. Oh, and one more thing, my apartment is on the 3rd floor.
Back in 2006, a couple of us had gone out to shine deer and hopefully bring some meat home. My brother and I were in the front. I was driving and he was shooting. When we pulled up to the field we had selected to shoot at, there were dozens of targets. So many that my brother had taken too long to choose and missed. He ran into the field, but we could not stop him. I drove off because I knew the police would surely show up. We drove for a bit, then circled back to pick my brother up. We called out to him and got no response. So I decided to go look for him. My friend and I went into the field along the tree line and whispered his name while searching. No response. We came to a spot in the tree line where you could feel and tell something was there. I called to him, still no response. We moved on, but I could not shake the feeling something had been there. I at first told myself it may be a downed deer near death or possibly a cow. We continued to search the field's tree line. No luck. I decided to have another look at what was at the spot where we felt the presence. We arrived at the spot and I instructed my friend to shine his phone onto the trees. There it was, standing next to a pine tree, blankly staring at us, was a small, gaunt, gray-looking person. Its hair was long and stringy, cheeks sunk in, but the most frightening was its eyes. They were completely black and staring. We stood only a couple seconds before we bolted back to our vehicle. We were both stunned. Not knowing what to do, we began to drive away when all of a sudden my brother out of nowhere came running. Terrified, he leapt into the car, stating something had chased him. To this day I cannot explain what it was we seen or chased my brother.
Wish I had saved pic for this one. They do appear in the daytime too. My boyfriend had his best friend pass away in the bush. He was a logger. Anyways, it's been like 15 years now he has been gone. But he reappeared when I started going out with my boyfriend of 6 years. We were at a friend's house having a few, taking pictures of us and friends. You know how it is when you check your pictures to see how they look. Well, lo and behold, there he was, standing in between my BF and I, smiling happily. Of course, I said, "Hey, the guy in the picture with us, I don't remember seeing him last night." My boyfriend looked, and shocked, with tears, said, "My God, that was my bestie. He died 13 years ago in the logging industry."
I have been living in this low rental house with a big yard in a quiet, friendly neighborhood for the past 13 years. My neighbors to the left are Polish elders, and to the right of my home they are Caucasian elders and have lived there long before my family moved in and still till this very day. As summer was coming to an end and days were getting chillier, one day I had decided to get some yard work done and rake up the leaves. I'm such an OCD perfectionist that I worked hard to make sure I raked and bagged every leaf in sight. As I made my way bringing bags full of leaves to the side of my house next to my garbage bin, I heard a hoot from an owl coming from the roof of my Polish neighbor's home. Right away I had a bad instinct. Due to my beliefs in cultural Blackfoot customs, it has always been known by most First Nations people that owls are messengers of death. That evening around midnight, I had phoned my mom for a ride to the bank. I got what I needed at a store and headed back home. During the way home we were admiring how bright the moon and stars were and how it made the evening feel full of serenity, knowing it was rare to see them like that, being in a city. As we pulled into my street slowly down the block near my home, we saw from a distance a very unusual tall man figure all in black hunched over, walking toward us with hands tucked in his long trench coat like pockets, wearing a black dress hat. I looked at the bottom of his long coat legs and feet and noticed they were like skinny sticks and no shoes, pants or thickness of a human leg and foot. My mother said quickly, "Who is that? What is that? Oh my God." As we got closer still at a slow pace, we started to squint our eyes looking at this dark tall man. Then he looked up at us and we both noticed he had no face. At that very moment, bam! This bright ball of light caught our attention to the side at the Polish people's house next door. This ball of light flew right out of the wall side of the house. My mother came to a stop as we watched this ball of light drift up and down over the next few houses toward us, then zoomed up in the sky. We looked back in front of us to see the tall dark man again, and boom, just like that, there was no one in front or behind us. Which was very weird because by the time we looked back, he should have been passing the side of our vehicle by then. Anyway, we said a quick prayer sitting in my driveway before she left just to be on the safe side. I was wide awake after. I then figured I will get tired if I snuggle on the couch to a movie. Halfway through my movie I noticed bright red and blue lights flashing in front of my home. I looked out the window and saw emergency services, police and fire truck next door at the Polish neighbor's home. The next day, as I was leaving, I heard an old man sobbing and crying on the side of the house. They don't speak English very well but know how to express themselves through simple sign language. As I approached this old man to see if he was okay, he looked at me with huge alligator tears that filled his eyes and streamed down his face, and he held his hands tapping his heart and almost as if breaking a twig piece of wood, looking to the sky. He pulled a picture of his wife out of the inside of his coat to show me and placed her on his heart. I felt so sad for him, as to my understanding he was trying to tell me his wife had just passed away and he was heartbreakingly lonely for her. He then reached both arms out to me for a hug. And just as he hugged me, his head sank into my shoulder and he leaned heavy onto me like it was all too much for him to bear. I couldn't help but have sympathy and held him too. I reassured him through sign language that he and his loved ones are in my prayers and thoughts. Since then we have become closer than ever and treat each other like family, checking on each other's well-being, keeping in good spirit to keep on keeping on. All in all, in my opinion, the owl sent a message that his wife was going to pass on to the spirit world, and the black tall man figure was the spirit of death and the bright ball of light was the spirit of my neighbor's wife leaving.
I had a very loving mother. Everyone called her Mom. She always checked on children and made sure they were okay. This was summertime and she decided to check on her grandchildren one humid evening, and it was getting dark, but she was worried about them. She set off for the 5-minute walk to my brother's. I must point out his house was brand new, not even a year old, and the electricity was disconnected. By the time she arrived it was pretty dark and it began to rain. When she entered the house, she heard children crying and said,
"Where are you kids?"
We're downstairs. Come and help us. We're stuck.
She stood at the door, unsure what to do. She took a few steps down. Feeling nervous, she said to them,
"I'll go get help."
The children screamed back,
No, Mom, don't leave us. Come and help us.
"I'll go get help."
She turned around and proceeded to leave, while the children begged for her help.
"I'll be right back."
And she shut the door behind her and hurriedly walked off. While walking on the road she met up with my brother, who was in a vehicle. He stopped and asked what was wrong, and my mom starts cursing at him.
"Why did you leave your kids home alone?"
Mom, the kids are at the babysitter's."
Her instinct was telling her not to enter the basement, and she wondered what would have happened if she did. To this day that house still experiences paranormal activity, and one of the spirits is a young boy.
One day, a truckload of friends and I went swimming, play some horseshoes. They had a fireplace, with benches around right next to a small river bank. We're going to start a party out there. Well, anyway, we started drinking about 2 hours before the sun went down. I was buzzed up, and needed to go to the bathroom. They have this old outhouse that we used. I had asked my friend if she needed to go to the bathroom. She said yeah, and we walked and talked on our way there. We did our business, and before we started walking back to where everyone was, by the horseshoe pit, she asked me if I would show her around, like take a walk in the woods. I told her, no, it's going to be getting dark soon. Can't be out in the woods like that. She replied, okay, and followed me back to the horseshoe pit. When I walked up to the pit, my friend was standing on the other side. I took a look behind me and nobody was there. The hair on my back stood up and I had a super scared feeling. I didn't want to mention it to anyone. I didn't want to freak anyone out. But the next day as we talked, I wasn't the only person who had seen something's out there.
I grew up on a reservation in Montana, and growing up, we were told stories of little people and giants or really tall beings. My sister and I had the same routine every morning before school. Our dad would wake us up about 7 a.m. and he would go to the barn to water and feed his horses. This one morning, there wasn't anything out of place in particular. I showered first as usual and then woke my sister up to get ready, and while she was in the shower I went into my parents' room and laid at the foot of the bed and was hanging my head off the edge of their bed, my feet facing the window. I would swing my head up and look toward the window. I did this about 2 or 3 times, and then the final time I looked, I saw this man with his back to the window. He was wearing a fedora hat. I could see the collar to his white dress shirt and with a black sport coat. I paused and stared for maybe 10 seconds and thought, why is my dad wearing a suit? So, I sprung out of bed, went out the door and looked at where that person was standing, and there was nothing there. I looked toward my dad's barn and he was just now coming back, and he was wearing his usual morning attire, Wranglers and a white Hanes undershirt. I asked him to stand under the window and he asked, why? And I proceeded to tell him of what I saw, and he didn't have an explanation and said he hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary while at the barn. Anyway, my dad was a sport about the whole thing and stood under his bedroom window, outside the house, and his head did not reach the base of the window by about a foot. So, later on when I got older I went and measured and estimated that the thing I saw had to have been about 8.5 to 9 feet tall. I was in the room with my door closed in my old apartment with my ex-boyfriend's daughter, watching a movie with her. My ex-boyfriend was in the living room playing his PS3, and the kitchen is beside the living room, but they're like to access ways, and it was dark in there. He said something creeped their head out slowly over the corner and looked at him. He thought it was me trying to scare him. He put down his controller quietly so I didn't hear him, and walked slowly to the other side of the kitchen trying to scare me. To realize no one was there, and I was in the room with his daughter watching a movie. He didn't want to tell me, but I made him, and I was freaked out regretting he did tell me. We live in an old building that used to be an old folks' home. Always felt like someone was watching me in there and got weird vibes. Glad I moved out when we broke up, but now the place I live in feels haunted. This picture was in the same house. My friend was talking a picture in the mirror, getting ready to go out, and there was a black shadow behind her with a top hat. I guess these houses were old.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentexts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember that all videos have been archived on the Odyssey page.